Hello, I'm Toycat, and it looks like the US might be acquiring some Panama infrastructure soon because soon-to-be President Donald Trump has threatened to take back control of the Panama Canal over the ridiculous fees being charged, saying indeed that Panama is ripping off the United States, the fees are ridiculous, and it is a rip-off to the country which will immediately stop, making an even bolder claim over here that if the moral and legal principles aren't upheld, then they will demand the Panama Canal be returned to us in full and without question. More or less saying, if you don't lower your fees, we will invade, which is an absolutely crazy thing to say, an exceedingly rare example of a US leader saying he could push a sovereign country to hand over territory, but I mean, when it comes to Trump, it's not exactly rare, I wouldn't say, but the important thing here is why is the US so obsessed with this canal? Why is something in Panama so important to America? And why do they say they're taking it back? And also, I guess, why is China's influence in the region something which many countries are very keen to watch out for? Well, let's talk about that today, starting with the most important thing, which is the basic geography of, yes, this is Panama, loosely defined as the bridge between North and South America. If you are from South America, you call all of this one continent, and so Brazilians say that they are Americans because they're from the continent America, whereas most people from North America and the English-speaking world would say that this is North America and it's divided at the Panama Canal. That goes from right here all the way up into these big lakes and then across on the other side, as you can see right here, and it's a very, very handy link because it means anyone in North America, Canadians, United Statesians, people who live in these countries can take their boats all the way round to the west coast without having to go around South America. It cuts literally days off the travel time, and so as a result, the Panama Canal is very, very important, particularly to people in North America, or indeed to people from Asia who are trying to ship to the East Coast, or East Coast shipping to Asia or Australia or whatever. You get the point? Being able to go over here and save yourself a lot of time is great, and so people have a big vested interest in this infrastructure, which, by the way, was built by us. I don't mean Americans, I'm not American, but fun fact, the UK tried to build this, or Scotland tried to build it, and it didn't go very well. I think a lot of people died, their colonies got burnt down. New Edinburgh is not a very big colony you might have heard of these days, and it wasted about a quarter to a half of the available wealth in Scotland, and so it's usually credited as being the thing that led to the Act of Union that brought England and Scotland together. So yeah, this was a failure, and so when the US was later considering how do we connect the two sides of our country better together, they could dig a very big canal all the way across the country, basically unheard of. I mean, there's big railroads and stuff, but a canal across the country would be ridiculous, or they could just find a third country over here, give them some money, and dig a canal, and Nicaragua was very on board with this, so there's a lot of routes they had proposed through there, but Panama just looked too easy, and so what did the United States do? Well, they built the canal, and they got a lease to the territory, which lasted until 1999, and so that is when the US no longer controlled the canal, and what Donald Trump thinks has happened since then is they've started charging ridiculous fees which are unfair. And I think there's a little bit of me that wants to bring out the boat nerdiness in this, which is, well, the Panama Canal is an amazing piece of worldwide infrastructure. It actually is very outdated. You can tell it was built in 1916 because it's very thin, it requires far too many locks. There's a lot of problems with it, even though it is very short geographically. It actually has all sorts of congestion problems, and so they can charge basically whatever they want because they are saving you days of travel time. It's the, I guess the argument that people make about like healthcare, where like, oh yeah, if there was a pill that you could take that would save your life, even if the pill costs 20 cents to make, you might pay hundreds of thousands for it because the alternative is you die. Even though the Panama Canal might not be worth the fees they're charging, the alternative is wasting days of your shipping and indeed days of fuel, days, all the coal, etc. So they can charge very, very high fees, which is something that a certain US president is not a big fan of. And so that is the long story short of why he's against it. But the more important question here is why is he worried about China and letting it fall into the wrong hands there? And this is the interest, and indeed, why is he willing to do something that no president has done in the 24 years that it's been owned by Panama fully? And why is he threatening to take back directly? And I think that's the interesting question for this video. Why would a United States president fully come out and say publicly to media, so that people like me can read this, that he's willing to invade Panama? And I would say this is kind of a change in US policy, which I think goes without saying, right? But it's basically a move away from trying to be really friendly with the world That's sort of what led to these agreements, right? Being like, we will give you money and we will be your best friends so we can dig a canal there. This is more, and again, you could argue, actually, building the Panama Canal really wasn't that friendly to Colombia, who they basically stole the territory from to make independence. But yeah, the argument is like, okay, yeah, being really, really friendly is the definition of soft power. Soft power is using your network or incentives, and this is what the US has used for a very long time, but basically Trump is trying to make sure that, even though they've got the soft power as a nation, that America utilizes its hard power as well. Threat and coercion are sometimes just as effective, if not more effective, than incentives to get people get things done. So if you go to Costa Rica, if you go to Panama, and you say to them, "Hey, the fees are a bit high. Could you lower them for us? Your good pals, the US, who built the canal," and they say, "Nope, the fees are what the fees are." Then you say, "Oh yeah, the US, the guys who built the canal. Just a reminder, our military budget is, what is it again? I forget how many trillions it is now, but just a reminder. I'm just going to drop that fact, and then I'm going to ask again. Oh yeah, could you do that?" And then if that doesn't work, maybe you be a bit of a brash president and you say, "Oh yeah, we will take it back unless you lower those fees. How are you feeling now? I'm not just going to tell you about the budget, I'm going to remind you that we can point it straight at you." And so this is a very, very controversial take to have, especially when it comes to their nearest allies. Although it is worth mentioning, it seems as though, weirdly enough, the jabs that the US has been taking at Canada almost have toppled the government over there, which is very, very wild to say. I think it is crazy what is happening in Canada, sort of as a result of what Trump has done. In fact, directly you can pinpoint the crisis to the finance minister and their opinion of it. But yeah, the fact that Trump is doing this to countries is kind of a reminder that he wants places to be on his side. And so why would you want that? I think there is a bit of a global infrastructure game going on, and it's been known for a while. By the way, I wanted to point out, so obviously it's weird, but when it comes to the Panama Canal being owned by Panama and sort of at one point being owned by the US is a really, really big deal, because Panama is a country which is just as susceptible to, let's say, being friendly with other countries as any other. And so it's there are giant pieces of global infrastructure that are owned by some countries. In fact, fun fact, the Suez Canal, way back in the literally 50 years ago now, over 60 I think, the Suez Canal is the reason that the UK is not considered a superpower. The UK tried to shut it down and take it over and remind Egypt who built it, and then the UK got maybe humbled, I think, if I had to tell that story very politely. It's one of the most fascinating pieces, I think the single most interesting event of post-World War II history for the UK is that time we tried to do something with Israel and France, and then all three of us were told, no, you don't do this, we control the strings. And that is an example of hard power being used to open up a canal, and basically it's the same thing happening here. But yeah, I wanted to briefly talk about canals, because I thought to myself, the two most important canals in the world, it's widely known, Egypt holds one, Panama holds the other. It's interesting because they're both they're not necessarily regional powers in any way, even though they have all of this control under them. And then I started looking into, what do you think the third most important canal in the world is? And this is a rabbit hole that will take you too deep, because you might say, well, logically, it's the Kiel Canal. It's the busiest waterway in the world with average of 90 ships in the world. It's crazy just how much goes through this. Indeed, just this single canal alone, which was actually built and has some fun roots in the German years that you don't get to talk about very much, but just this single canal alone makes a huge difference to allowing people to avoid Denmark. Sucks to be Denmark, by the way. Or you might say, no, it's the St. Lawrence Seaway. This is the thing that allows a large amount of the United States and some of Canada to be connected to the outside world. This is a very, very important set of canals and locks and stuff like that, you might say. Although, again, I'm not fully convinced on that, because how much foreign shipping ever comes to these places? There's a lot of very interesting points here. But yeah, when it comes to the third canal, I would like to hear your thoughts down below, because I'm not sure I can come to one. I looked at the St. Lawrence one, and it was a reminder of just why, I guess, almost everyone in Canada lives in these two provinces. And when you look at a map, you realize, oh yeah, it's that one river, isn't it? Water defines so much of why people live where they live now. And I think it's fascinating. Quebec City, the city which Quebec is named after, fun fact, exists over here, and they settled it because they're at the top of the river where it meets the sea, seems like a really good place for a city, and it's still a good city. I used to go on tangents in these videos where I talk about oh yeah, and there's a girl I dated from this country, but sadly you can say that I've gotten older over the course of this channel, because for Quebec City, my tangential fact I want to tell you is I ate a cake that looked like a flower pot in Quebec City, and then I climbed up a waterfall, or I climbed up a dam actually, a very, very interesting dam. But yeah, anyway, the point here is to say that when it comes to the third most important canal, it's hard to say, but what isn't hard to say is that global infrastructure is kind of going China's way. I mean, when it comes to ports, these are all owned basically nationally. Unlike canals around the world, ports are basically set up so you can get goods from the outside world into a country, and then from Savannah, New York, LA, or Long Beach. Crazy, by the way, that they're so close together and still so much bigger than New York, Savannah, and every other port on the continent, by the way. But yeah, the interesting thing to say about this is that, like, all of these are owned basically nationally, but going between countries is when it gets a little bit messier. One of the biggest disadvantages, in the same way we talk about, like, Canada on the east is so successful because of this river. The reason that Russia largely is so poor off in terms of international standards is because all of their water access has some other country which controls it. Even in their very small and narrow, useful warm water port here, it's like, oh yeah, they've got to go past all these countries, then they've got to ask Germany nicely to use their canal, or go past Denmark, and it's very hard for Russian goods to get to the rest of the world. They can go through the Black Sea, then they have to pass by this bit of Ukraine, which Ukraine is definitely going to have some issues with because Ukraine is in full control, we can say, and then they're going to have to pass through it's a very, very, very busy strait right here, and then the point is like most countries have some easy access to the rest of the world, but Russia doesn't, and the east of Canada does. And so that is why ports are important, but so too are international waterways, and so too are all the other pieces of national infrastructure, which is why China is investing in these things. This is the, it's called the Belt and Road Initiative. China nominally, and I think validly, are saying, oh yeah, we have a lot of money pouring in, we're growing very rich as a nation, and we're going to use some of that money to invest in the infrastructure which allows our goods to get out there. In other words, saying, at some point the bottleneck on how much we can sell to the world is how fast the world can get our goods. So what if we sped that process up? And so by investing in a bunch of countries, this is sometimes called debt trap diplomacy because they sort of use the debt. It's not like a gift. It's usually comes in the form of a loan, and the loan has some pretty aggressive terms, such as, by the way, my favorite article on this is Game of Loans: How China Bought Hambantota, which is the port in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka gave China a controlling equity stake and a 99-year lease, and basically they stopped paying their debt. So now China owns a port in Sri Lanka. Wow, that's very convenient. They can set up the port rules, or at least set up the port, so it's very, very easy to get Chinese goods there. And the same is true for all of the countries in the world here. My bad there. All of the countries in the world, as you can see, that aren't part of the, like, safe-to-drink tap water club, I guess if we can reference that meme one more, but the Western world broadly are the places where you can see China isn't making investments. All of these third-party countries, in exchange for a little bit of like, oh yeah, make sure you don't recognize Taiwan, not that you'd want to anyway, am I right? Make sure that you, buy some of our stuff with this, but we'll make sure we invest some good money in your country if you make sure that you make that money work for us, sort of. And it's a very, very interesting move, which is China's move to basically, I guess if the US is going for military domination of the world, China's trying to make a play towards economic domination. And so it's kind of, if you really want to make a comparison here, it's kind of like a Cold War of the world, the First and Second World thing, except on economic fronts. And so that is the reason why the US is kind of concerned about what if China starts working on infrastructure projects that make it harder for US goods to get to the world. And so there are two ways you can fix this. One is to be really friendly to all of the countries in red here and be like, hey, just remember, we're your good friends too. Russia, hey, you know how you're becoming friendly with China? What if you were friendly with us as well? And indeed, say that to every single country here. The game of soft power is what that would come down to, I guess you could say. Make the cultural hierarchy and the networks affect it. Make it so that countries working with you is a really good thing. Or you could go the route which Donald Trump seems to be going down, which is to say, no. Let's not play a game of money, which we're going to lose because we spend our money on defense. If we're going to have the defense, which, when you spend $1 trillion on defense, can you call it defense anymore? What if we instead go for a bit more of a hard power game? What if we don't necessarily directly threaten people besides Panama? They're or, you know, indeed Canada. When we make some vague, joking threats towards people, so they remember that we are the people who can make the very serious threats. Now, on the surface, this isn't such a bad idea, and I think it's something I want to talk about in this video for that reason, that if you come at this from an angle of like, you know, rather than saying, but it's not morally right to threaten people, if you have the world's biggest military and economy, why wouldn't you try to use that to make things work better for you? Well, that's what the idea of America first could be, you could say, but the biggest reason you probably shouldn't go around threatening people is you want everyone around to look at you and be like, oh yeah, they're real cool. I do what they want without them having to, you know, threaten me, because at some point someone will call your bluff and you'll have to look really extra bad, and that's what basically happened with Russia. Both during the Soviet Union times, when they invaded Hungary, you get a real moral loss, you know, you get a real, I don't know how to word it any better, but all of your allies start to look at you and say, oh, they're not our friends, they're just people who point guns at our head, and that is the biggest downside to using hard power. If, you know, countries which are on pretty good terms with the US, like the Germanys of the world, the Australias of the world, the Frances, the UKs, the Icelands, if all of these countries start to look at America and go, ooh, I didn't realize, I thought they were friendly because they liked us, but they're actually friendly because it's in their interests, that can be a thing which works out, again, if you use that to get the best deals that you're looking for, but also that then has downsides where, unlike, you know, like when the countries, some countries will want to work with you, but some countries will do their best to avoid being hurt by you, which is not the same thing. There is a much greater analysis into soft power, hard power that we can dive into, but I think the simplest way we can say it is that affecting others and obtaining the outcomes you want through attraction or persuasion, rather than coercion or payment, is good. Payments and coercion, that costs money and that costs capital, but soft persuasion, you know, a nice word here or there, is something that is very cheap, which is one of the reasons why, you know, despite the UK not being a superpower, and the same being true for France, why a lot of Western European countries can punch well above their economic and population weights in the world, and is one of the reasons why I would say that you should be cautious if you look at this and say, yeah, that's good. Because even though I think it's fun on the surface, I think there is a deeper move there that is maybe irreversible. But, you know, that's just my analysis from the outside. In reality, I think, you know, all of these comments here, I think basically all of them can be said to be like, yeah, this is a joke, more or less, but it's a joke with a slight underlying meaning, right? It's the same is true when you say how much you're going to invade Mexico, or if you make comments about buying territory that Denmark says isn't for sale, you do start to make your allies go, huh, would they do that? Whereas you want them to think they would never do that because they are my friends, and I want to do good things for my friends. But again, I feel like maybe this will work better for the US, and who's to say? I just, from the UK, I do have a very biased perspective living in a country that is not America and seeing America grow to be a less and less stable ally. But hopefully, you know, that's just one part of their strategy. And the other part is the nice things and the making you want to work in their favor, because that's what the US probably needs. Speaking of things the US needs, if you enjoyed this video, then I would like it if you went to nordvpn.com/don'tactually and use someone else's referral code to get 10% off your first month. Anyway, with that said, I thought, you know, how about we do a sponsor spot for me? You know, or actually, how about we do a sponsor spot for something random? If you like this video, what you need to do is you need to go to the Calapanana Design. Wait, I shouldn't do that. It's got to be a real business. Like, you should go to the Wendy's on Camden High Street, and you should buy yourself a Frosty. That's what I recommend. Use code TOYCAT, and they'll act very confused. But they'll know that I sent you. That's what you got to do if you like this video. It's a very well located Wendy's, by the way. Gotta say, you know, the Camden is like one of the worst parts of London to walk through. I don't know why anyone enjoys this or why we still let the cars have this much space. But every time you go here, you're just like, there is a sea of people, and all of these people came here because they wanted to be in the sea of people. And I think that's very strange, personally. But you know what else I think is strange? This video's ending. So second channel, don't care. Goodbye. So this is a Wendy's.